Hello Space Watchers and welcome back to the ISC floor. This is the fourth day, we're still here in Milan and this is the live Space Café 33 minutes with. And with me today I have the pleasure to ask my Carmen fellow and friend Dr Nelly Ben Hayun Stepanian from the Nelly Ben Hayun Studios. Nelly, welcome.
Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited.
It's a pleasure. So Nelly had a very interesting session a couple of days ago. It was about decolonizing space and I wanted her to tell me with her own words, what did this represent, what was the main takeaway messages, and more important, why you felt the need to present something that was definitely be alternative within the context of the usual technological sessions. Nelly, over to you. What this was about?
So, first of all, thank you for having me to talk about decolonial space and what does that mean. Because I think, I've been going in these spaces, the Astronautical Congress, for more than 13 years now. And what you find is actually we are just repeating again and again and again the same narrative. And when you identify them, you realize that a lot of this narrative and a lot of the futures that are being offered to members of the public are actually extremely oppressive. They are just repetition of history and empirical history, colonial history that we have seen just extracting again and again and again the lens of other people and so forth with complete disrespect. And we've seen the failure of these systems, right? So the point of the decolonial practices session is to really say, hold on a second, let's reflect as a community, as a cohort of, smart people together about actually what about figuring out alternative futures that are not just a repetition of things that we have already seen in the past are just not working. So it really is about addressing oppressive narrative that we have currently in the space sector and also offering alternative stories to this sector so we can start thinking afresh, thinking new, and actually proposing alternatives that maybe perhaps are more colorful, more diverse, more queer, more eco-feminist, more, just different than what is currently on offer, which are really monolithic, linear, and just lacking a lot of imagination. And I think that's the bottom line, is how can we start bringing back some radical imagination in our industry? Because it's more than ever needed.
I really like radical imagination, and let's always remember that the root of science and art is both creativity and imagination. So this is my opinion, I don't want to influence that. My impression sometimes is that all what you just say, the kind of stiff system made on old preconcepts, also not only kills creativity in the art, but also creativity in the science. Everything becomes about bureaucracy and rules and regulation, and there is no space for the kind of radical imagination that is what brings us forward new ideas in science as well.
And it goes back to the workforce, right? I think what you find is that a lot of the decolonial practice session, which is, like you mentioned, a technical session, so anyone in the community is able to attend it, is really a place where we have equity, diversity, inclusion, commitment from different space agencies. How do they teach their workforce to actually think differently? What are they doing for inclusivity? How do they design mission with inclusivity at the core and accessibility at the core? Because I think times have changed, we are not anymore at the time of Apollo, where we're just here to plant a flag. We are here in a context where, the International Space Station is going to get decommissioned, and we need a new idea, a new kind of like launchpad towards peace, because space shouldn't be just a replicate of what we have on Earth. It can be actually something different.
So which were your guests? Who did you invite?
I didn't invite them. They are like authors, so they submitted a paper, and then we, like it works in the industry, like we peer review, we select the paper. So we had, papers that were addressing, obviously current socio-political issues. We had papers that were actually looking at theater and how theater can inform new ways of thinking, what's being done in theater, and how they address decolonial thinking and how that can be used in, in the context of space. We had museums that presented their decolonial way of thinking about redistribution or just, like acknowledging the past. We had paper from NASA as well about how they were talking to indigenous communities and getting them involved in the development of new missions. So a really big, broad variety of papers. Papers on intergenerational trauma and the link between intergenerational trauma and space exploration and others. So very, very big diversity. But I think mainly what I found really exciting is like these are truly innovative papers. And these are truly innovative ideas. And not only that, it's actually addressing a fundamental of our industry, the space industry, is that space is not a discipline on its own. It is completely pluridisciplinary. And so a key element of this, committee or session is really to bring back this notion of plurality, pluridisciplinary, and actually making it the starting point of any mission.
And
right?
I found, speaking about innovative papers, I followed one of the lectures, one of the papers that was given, it was about the inclusivity of the gay community. And I thought it was very interesting, the perspective that the speaker provided, and this is connected with the workforce, that he said true inclusivity, so embedded inclusivity, opening the door to anyone, actually is good for everyone. Because they say improve the mood, improve the feeling accepted, improve freedom of speech of everyone, not only of the LGBTQ community, but for everyone. And I thought that was a very interesting point, and that one I thought was quite radical, because I think we are safely assuming that in this industry, at the ISC or any other space conference, we don't really discuss about real inclusivity when it comes to the workforce, how we can actually embed it. We don't really invite a representative of the LGBTQ community to speak about the problems that they face. This is, for me, one of the maybe the first time I saw something like this in a conference of this stage. So speak about innovation, I thought that was very interesting.
Totally. And I think it's also at the core of the idea of this session is to say that it's not me and them, in a way. It's time to actually think about space as a whole.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's like, the queer community is at the core of the way that we need to actually think as a workforce that, if someone is feeling closeted, that, to your point, is not going to serve the mission as a whole. So it's so important to really unpack these issues so that actually everyone that is designing a new mission actually understand that it's at the, like I said, like inclusivity, accessibility is at the core of the starting point of the mission.
And it was very interesting how those papers, at least I perceived like that, they were not presented as and you. There was not this split duality. It was more like we are part of the community. Let us in, I think we can enrich it, and we're all together in this, and I really like that. And
the other key element of that session, and you probably noticed that as well, is like in the room we had about 100 people, and they were all young people.
Yeah.
And I consider you to be also really young, so that's that.
Thank you.
But, it's like, it's a reality. It's like our industry is getting older. Let's just be real. You cannot not connect with contemporary issues. And that's, it's time to kind of like evolve.
New blood.
And so it's part of the Space Education and Outreach Committee session. And so it's really at the core of that session to learn, to teach, to educate our industry. And so, we're going to keep on going and doing this session for the years to come. And we hope that we will grow that eventually into other committees and for everyone to kind of take part, of course.
Yeah, because let me ask you something. When I saw this session, I thought, would this happen even only 5 years ago? So in a sort of way, I have to say, to me, it was quite an important signal. Have you predicted that today you would have been able to propose such a session with such a heterogeneous community here at the ISC?
Do you know, I think I can honestly say it took me 13 years.
Okay.
I think this is probably the, speaking personally here as Nelly, I think this is probably my biggest achievement is to know that this session is there for the years to come and that, people will be able to speak about these issues, resolve them, open up to uncomfortable topics and actually allow a space and a platform for new imagination to exist. And I think this is the big part of our session is to acknowledge the past so that we can better think about the future. I mean, that is a fundamental idea. And I think we just tend to take it for granted and not, use that key element at the beginning of the design of any space mission, while it should be really at the start of it all.
Yeah.
Have we done this before? Okay, let me hold on a second. Did this happen in history before? Christopher Columbus, let's call the Columbus, for example, is a really good example, right? Like NASA called the Columbus space shuttle, forgetting that Columbus obviously wrecked the entire US from the indigenous, communities. So it's a very violent message to any indigenous communities. So how do we actually start afresh and start to come up with names, or not just linguistics, like also framework that are much more inclusive from the get-go? Get different people in the room, get them to reflect on these issues, get them to brainstorm with you at the starting point of an issue, and start to come up with commons. I think this idea of building commons together is really important.
And also, let me just point out something before we move to the next question. You mentioned the question of the uncomfortable topics. These are uncomfortable for us and for the oldest generation, but my perception is that the younger generation, they feel way less uncomfortable with it. So we need to break this. But every time I speak with kids of 14, 15 years old, they don't have the same problems that we have in discussing those things. They're way more open, way more used to think in a different dimension. Let me ask you this question. You were there for all the session. What do you think were the takeaway messages? Something that really struck you, I see a pattern here. This is something that has to be picked up and brought to the next step. Something that you resonated with you.
I mean, obviously, I think for me, sustainability means many different things, right? So this year, the Astronautical Congress main idea is beyond sustainability. How do we make a more sustainable space? And I think it's not just about climate change, it's also about sustainability in the long run for a community of humans. And that is to come together with better working practices, better code of conduct, better linguistics, and I think that is really my, I would say, my hope is that actually we start to understand that innovation also comes from pluridisciplinary speech, and confrontation in a way, or not confrontation, but maybe collaboration, but also from actually bringing different people with different backgrounds, different heritage in the room, people that have first-hand experience, the horror of wars, of genocide, of, the horror that humans have done on this planet, and actually start to reflect on it and do things differently. Because we don't have to repeat the past in space. We don't have to do that. We can do it totally differently. And I will leave you with this idea, actually. It's how about we stop making white rockets to start with? How about we start... No, but this is really... Because here we're talking about alien aesthetics, right? Okay. We just assume as a community that a rocket needs to be white, or we just came up with this kind of and it's not just the colors, I mean, it's a very just metaphorical idea there that I bring on the table, but, you could really start looking at a complete different way of presenting space to members of the public. Because what are we doing here? We're talking about futures, and we are talking about future in very monolithic, binary, color palettes, ways of functioning and so forth, so we can do things differently.
Yeah, the symbol is important as much as the content, absolutely. Yeah. It's so how we use the meta language, how we use the colors, what we paint, how we use the flags, everything goes together into a narrative and a meta-narrative, absolutely.
And actually, JAXA has got a yellow rocket behind us.
Okay, there you go.
So, they got it, the Japanese Space Agency is actually looking at another color palette.
Boundaries.
But it's imagine the CGI renders that we see on TV all the time about space. What if you had something that was fluorescent yellow? I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating. Yeah, that's not really the point, but you get me. It's let's start looking at things a bit differently.
And do you think this is the right time to actually try to change the narrative? Because my feeling is that if we don't introduce this thinking now, then we're going to end up again in the usual old system.
Correct.
Isn't it?
I think it's really it's most urgent, I would say, to do that. It's not even, it's actually, it's an obligation. I think we will end up with human extinction.
If we,
I think this is just something that people, you know, Hannah Arendt, political theorist, was talking about straight after the atomic bomb, right, were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? The fact that we don't use critical thinking when we develop technological tool will lead to human extinction. So without going dramatic, I think is the bottom line that we need to start being much more inclusive as a community so that we can actually reflect on what is it that we are trying to achieve here. If the goal is to redo the same thing that we've done on planet Earth on the moon, then forget it. We have it already happening on Earth, like just, you know, no point. But if the goal is to go to the moon to actually do something that is going to be different than what we've seen for the past 100 years, with a new model of functioning, new economics, new politics, new sociology, new technological tool, then yes, here we are talking innovation.
Yeah.
Let's not just, I mean, I guess the space industry, like many other industries, the creative industry, all of the industry, is really good at congratulating each other. But I think it's time to actually not do that and actually reflect on what we are not doing well and how can we get better at it. And this session, the decolonial space session, is really the starting point to bring in this conversation at the core and to say, let's be inclusive, let's be actually much more accessible, because we are also completely inaccessible. The price cost to get to this conference is off the roof. You know, not just the cost, but like how do we invite more young people to come to these spaces? So much more we can do. And in a way, it's really hopeful, because it means that, you know, this is for us an opportunity within our lifetime to change.
To change something, absolutely. And as you say, critical thinking when we develop new technology, this is fundamental. And I think to have critical thinking, if everyone thinks the same, it means that nobody's thinking. So you need to bring in this different perspective. So if there is a bias in the narrative, somebody can point it out. And this is why you need multiple voices, absolutely. I really like this, what we are not doing well. We are definitely all self-congratulatory. This is completely true. And I think accepting this and just starting to be more critical with us, it's one fundamental step. Last question. What's the next step? Now, this is a massive achievement for you.
Yeah.
IAC is going to close tomorrow, so Monday is another day. What's the next step towards your mission, towards your goal, towards this long journey that you have ahead of you to bring all these ideas into practice?
I mean, I think you mentioned it, but obviously Space Pride is a new, a new mission as well that is being developed, which is supposed to be there as well to bring in, and open up about LGBTQ plus, issues. And I think it's very necessary that we address that. And we actually have like queer thinking being involved as well in the development of our space mission, being more inclusive. I think accessibility is another one. I think people with alternative, abilities should be also welcome in the conversation and should feel welcome. And I think it's a big part to feel welcome. And to be welcome is two things as well that needs to happen. So new session on that. My colleague was telling me about as well starting a new session on nature and how we can take inspiration from nature in the development of new mission, and specifically the research that is going on right now with species like fungi and others, and how we can use some of that thinking and some of this research in biology and natural environment and bring that back into
science,
space and space industry,
absolutely.
and actually allocate a space for natural science to be represented at IAC. I think would be really powerful and really interesting from an innovation angle and technological angle. I think we should welcome as well people that are thinking about messaging extraterrestrial intelligence as well. We speak a lot about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Let's also welcome people from the other side of the community which are messaging. I mean, there is plenty of things that we can do, and I'm hopeful that we're gonna allow for this space to happen and keep them coming,
I know I promised that was the last question, but now I have a very last question.
Okay, bring it on.
You're an artist. How did you ended up with this bunch of people, with us, with this?
Yeah, but I mean, because initially I started in medicine and then I moved into the arts, then I did textile design, then I did design, and then I did a PhD in political science.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's the thing
path,
is like, I think when you're an artist or when you are creative or when you are you need to know all of these different things. And actually, very rarely actually in this community, in the Astronautical Congress, did I find someone that is just one thing. In order to lead a space mission, you need people that can think outside of the box. And, I'm one of those for sure.
Definitely.
But I think, you are one of those. I think like people that comes with a different background, that have got like a very pluralistic background actually, are much more entitled to come up with fresh thinking than maybe others. So I do know how to work with scientists. I love working with scientists and I love to build pluridisciplinary team. I don't have all of the answers and I'm not seeking to have all of the answers. I cannot just rely on my own self to come up with like all of the answers. So I need to work with people. This notion of organized community is at the core of my work, and I think it should be it's at the core of many others as well. And and Mia as well, I'd love to say a massive thank you as well to my colleagues at the Space Education and Outreach Committee and Cultural Committee of Outer Space, and of course the Carmen Project, because it takes a lot of people to ally behind you. Like I didn't do this on my own. Of course, I wanted to do this session for 13 years, but I was pushed in that direction and I was supported by my colleagues in that direction. And
13 years in the making.
Yeah, 13 years in the making, in the baking. So yeah.
So what do you do in your studios? Is it just science? Is it just space? Or do you also bring in also other disciplines?
Yes, so we do a lot of different things, like I work with clients like Mattel, I started the I Can Be campaign where, we started having like all kids starting to see and imagine themselves in any jobs they wanted to do. So I think at the core of my studio is really this idea of youth counterculture and how can I support the development of new imagination within youth and develop platform for them to express themselves. We run a tuition-free university called the University of the Underground, which is accessible to all, where we teach about space and space science, actually, and how you can modify thinking through pluridisciplinary, teaching. So we do lots of different things, but, we put together huge festivals all across the UK and beyond. And I run an orchestra at NASA called the International Space Orchestra.
Because you're a player, a musician as well?
I am not, but I work with musicians.
Okay.
So they perform with Beck, they perform with Sigoros. They've done huge, they're massive rock star actually. And they reenact everything to do with the space exploration.
Okay.
So, we've been going on for quite a while now and it's been,
it's building up, absolutely.
Yeah, so we do that in the studio basically, and we do like brand research and innovation is kind of at the core of what we've worked with many different people, including space agencies, but like I mentioned, brands like Mattel, Airbnb, we did the Airbnb experience, like all of these different projects. How can we actually bring community and inclusivity at the core and at the starting point of any design process? I think that's the core of what we do in the studio.
And it's interesting how there is an interesting parallel between building from inclusivity and building from sustainability. I'm thinking about environmental sustainability, but more than once I felt myself the need to remind that if we want to be really sustainable in the future, we really need to bring the concept of environmental sustainability within the economical cycle. So you have to engine a mission already thinking about its environmental impact, what it's going to do, what it's going to cause. Even think about any project should have this kind of environmental component from the beginning. And it seems similar, and it seems parallel to what you're saying with the inclusivity. You design a working team thinking about it.
Totally. And actually you found that there was a session about space debris now. And most of the space agencies are now signing, I can't remember the name of that protocols, but now if they start a new mission, they have to sign it and actually say that they're going to...
The zero charter.
Exactly, the zero charge, that's the one. They're going to just get back all of their debris as opposed to like letting them...
Just letting them drop there. And on this, Nelly, it was fantastic to be here with you.
Thank you so much
Let me allow me to shout also to the Karman project who allowed us to come together. As usual, a constant inspiration of...
Shall we say something about what the Karman project is about? Or
maybe we should, since we're here, absolutely. Like, our audience knows the Karman project very well. Both Nelly and I are Karman fellows. It's probably one of, in my opinion, one of the most outstanding and interesting initiative going on in nowadays to bring together new space leaders. I'm not sure how many leaders, but definitely new space thinker maybe. And for me, it's been a great opportunity to open up new doors and think in a different way and meet extraordinary people like you. This is my perspective from the Karman project. I don't know if you want to add it.
Stuck with each other for a week, right?
Exactly.
I mean, this is the way they do it. They just put us together, locked up together, and then here we are, brainstorm, come up with the next vision for peace and for humanity, you know, in space. And I think that's beautiful as a starting point to think about peace as opposed to what we currently have on offer.
Exactly, to conflict.
Colonization of the moon, colonization of Mars. Forget about that. Think afresh, people.
Fantastic. And on this, Nelly, thank you so much for being with me. And this is it for today for Space Café 33-minute suite directly from the IAC floor in Milan. Thank you.
Thank you.